Welcome everybody to Sow and Grow Regenerative. My name's John, and this is Permaculture, a Regenerative Mindset, Webinar 1, part of a series of webinars. And this is the Permaculture Principles and Ethics. A little bit about me. I gave this presentation last week, but I had to re-record it. As I didn't record it basically. So this is for all of those that didn't attend and for those that perhaps would like a copy of it. I'm a little bit of a, I struggle with technology, and this is only my second time recording, so bear with me. I'll make it as smooth as possible and hopefully you'll all learn something from it. So I will just go around to sharing my screen. So just bear with me. Okay. So permaculture, permanent agriculture. So permaculture comes from, well, it's got a long and deep history, but essentially permaculture means permanent agriculture. Its purpose is to create agricultural systems that are based on ecological natural systems, such as a forest. It doesn't have to be a forest, but this is one of the best ways to explain it, in a way that is in harmony with nature, takes a holistic approach, and essentially ensures that what we feed to our soil and our plants eventually comes to ourselves. And the fundamental principles and ethics of permaculture build a framework which enables people to not only connect with nature and be a steward for that bit of land, but also to be able to nourish themselves. And you'll find out through this presentation exactly what this entails and why permaculture came about and the practical implications of permaculture in today's modern agricultural system. So a regenerative mindset. Now, the reason I decided to title these webinars a regenerative mindset is simply because permaculture is about regenerative practices. Okay, so it's about cycles and patterns that we see throughout nature, throughout the universe, and understanding that in order to be able to make this world a healthier, more holistic, and more abundant world, we actually need to change our mindset. And this is one from that we are separate from nature to one where it is an all-inclusive organism. So anything that we do to our soil, to our plants, to our oceans, to the rivers, eventually comes back to us. And we can see this through modern illnesses. A lot of chronic diseases are actually attributed to our environment. Specifically, I'll be talking about the food aspect, but this is synonymous throughout our culture. So permaculture, there's many ways you can describe permaculture, and lots of permaculturists or permaculture designers such as myself will have their own interpretation, but essentially we can kind of divide this up into categories. So the practical element of permaculture is using the design principles and ethics which allow us to produce food, textiles, fuel, fiber, and a lot more. And obviously, whenever you're practicing something like permaculture, it's important to get a yield. But the way we do this in permaculture differs from the modern agricultural system, which I will go into later. Permaculture is a holistic approach to life. So it envelops all aspects and fields of nature and society. Permaculture isn't just about growing food, it's actually about people as well, society, culture, even into religion. A lot of the old belief systems that we have on the planet are actually intertwined with the workings of nature. And permaculture, on another practical level, is a solution. It provides solutions to all the problems we face. So everything from food that is lacking in nutritional value to cleaning up our rivers and our oceans can all be done through the permaculture mindset or the permaculture lens. And this permaculture lens actually enables us to see the deeper meaning of growing our own food, becoming more self-sufficient, and living a regenerative life. From my personal experience, when I embarked upon learning permaculture and put it into practice, what I realized was I was learning more about myself than I anticipated. I was fortunate that I had a background in studying Buddhism, and these things are actually very, very similar. They have a lot of parallels. So the history of permaculture, it goes back quite a long way. Certainly regenerative growing practices and techniques go back a long way. But permaculture, the word permaculture and the idea of this and the principles are quite recent in our history. We can actually go back to 1929 to be able to see what that was. But if we go back to the ancient civilizations, such as the Celts, the Native Americans, the Aborigines, the Amazonians, all of them had a very intrinsic, deep connection with Mother Earth. They knew about the seasons, they knew about the cycles of the moon, they knew about the cycles of the sun, they understood where the stars were, and they even plotted this out in monolithic sites. So we can go back to Stonehenge, for instance, and see that actually they had a really amazing connection with the natural world. Of course, they relied heavily on it, and they understood that if they weren't in rhythm with it, that it could easily mean the difference between life and death. So I haven't done a lot of studies into these native cultures, but a fair amount to understand that they all knew about cycles. And it was the cycles that were the important things. They knew when to sow seeds. They didn't have a calendar like we had. Some of them might have had sundials, but they knew when the sun was at a certain height in the sky that it was time to plant seeds. They knew that when they could see certain constellations in the night sky, they knew that was a time. Like Taurus, I'm a Taurus, that was a time for ploughing the fields, or certainly making way for planting seeds. Okay. And Virgo, for instance, is when we would harvest things like wine, like fruit crops. And all of this is really important to consider, because it gives us an understanding of what is actually possible. And to really understand where we're going in the future, we can look at our history. So, more recently, certainly in the 20th century, in 1929, a man called J. Russell Smith wrote a book called Tree Crops, A Permanent Agriculture. He was observing the farming industry in America, in the US, certainly in the West, And he saw that these farming practices were very damaging to the soils, particularly on slopes. So, as some of you may be aware, slopes over a certain gradient are prone to erosion. The reason why most slopes on the planet naturally have trees growing in them is to prevent erosion. It's the root system that actually strengthens the slope. As America's civilization was expanding to the west, they started to use every available patch of land, and they were using slopes to grow grains. The problem is grains don't have a tremendous root system. And along with using certain fertilizers, they were actually destroying, taking the trees away. This actually was partially contributed towards an event known as the Dust Bowl. And the Dust Bowl was when there was a climatic change, drought came, and because of the way they treated their soils, taking away the trees and also using plows, which compacted the soil, this actually meant that any water that came and landed on the ground just washed straight off. And along with the water washing off, all the nutrients were taken away as well. If you compact any soil, it forms an almost impenetrable layer. So water's just going to sit on it. Many of you may have seen waterlogged fields as you've driven past them. That's because the farmers use heavy machinery, which actually compacts the soil. Now, at the same time as this, America was going through the Great Depression. Now, these things are actually interrelated, and we can look at today and see our economies are slowly failing, but so is our food system, and these things are interrelated. And we can bring in many other events that are happening around the world at the moment, but nothing is a coincidence. Everything is interrelated. So this is really important to remember. This is to give you context and background to why permaculture actually kind of came into fruition as a practice. So more recently, and certainly more notably, in the 1970s, two men, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, who met at Tasmania University. They were teacher and student respectively. They were working on separate things, but they came together and they started to study ancient cultures around the world. And they obviously had access to the longest standing ancient culture, which is the Aborigines. And they saw, after lots of research, that the Aborigines actually had a very amazing relationship with their land. They grew fields of yams and other kind of exotic fruit. And they also knew practices like controlled burns of forest, because they had observed over tens of thousands of years that forests naturally burned. But in order to mitigate against too much of this, when climatic changes were quite heavy, they would burn the forest. What this also did was clear the forest so they'd be able to hunt animals, because it's easier to hunt animals out in the open than it is in tree dense areas. So they formed these foundations. They came up with the ethics and a certain number of principles. Over the recent decades, this has actually expanded. The ethics have stayed the same, but the principles have kind of expanded as more and more people practice permaculture. And the greatest thing about these two were that they knew that individuals would be the ones that made the changes. So you can certainly look into these two men. Bill Mollison wrote a book called Permaculture, A Designer's Manual, Many permaculturists around the world use this as their initial guide. So the ethics, what are they? Earth care, people care, future care, also known as fair share. But together they make up the foundations of permaculture. They can be seen as separate, ways of looking at how permaculture can be utilized, but essentially they're all integrated and interrelated. So the first is obviously earth care. Now, our earth, our soil supports our entire civilization. It provides all the food, all the medicine, all the materials we need. Without the earth, the planet would be a very different place. We wouldn't have been able to expand our civilization the way we have without our food. And an example of this is the fall of the Roman civilization was partly due to the lack of food. If you can't feed an army, you can't colonize other countries. So, and you can look at literally every single civilization that has risen and fallen, and it's all been to do with food and the weather. So, there's lots of material out there where you can research this type of stuff. And earth care is about understanding patterns and cycles of nature. We obviously, I believe we've all been disconnected from the earth. There's not many people on the planet. The less dense the houses are together, the more exposure you have to the land. So people in cities generally have less of a connection to nature than people out in the country. That's not a sweeping statement, but that's just obviously a observation. And it's important to remember as well that what nature provides us can feed every single person on this planet. There is enough land to grow enough food for over 8 billion people on the planet. The problem is how the food is grown, how the food is treated, the nutritional content of the food, and how the food is distributed. So, these patterns and cycles are important to remember, because what we can do is we can look at the patterns and cycles in the past, and we can obviously attribute them to a degree of what's going to happen in the future. And earth care it forms the foundations of our relationship and our interactions with nature. If we understand just how powerful the earth is, then the earth will actually work to our benefit. We poison the earth in many different ways. And, there's no coincidence that it actually affects us. There's that saying, we are what we eat. So how we treat the earth directly relates to our own health, well-being, and happiness. And through this understanding, we can actually create a symbiotic relationship with nature. This doesn't mean that we have to give away the modern conveniences we have in life. It means that we need to understand their relevance to our own health, abundance, and happiness. My experience is when you disconnect more with technology, you actually have a more fulfilling life. Technology tends to make us quite anxious because it's a very distorted way to compare ourselves with other people. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. Doesn't mean that technology doesn't have a benefit to us, because I wouldn't be able to reach the people I reach without Zoom and without certain aspects of social media that I use. Okay. So, the problem, what is the problem we have with our earth? So, industrial agriculture and health. You know that the food we actually grow in the current agricultural model not only depletes and degrades the soil, it actually poisons it. It poisons it with chemicals that eventually leach into the plants. The plants actually uptake them. I'm not talking about fertilizers like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. I'm talking about things like glyphosate, which is a carcinogenic essentially. And glyphosate is actually a derivative of DDT. And some of you may know that DDT is or was chemical orange, which is what they sprayed on the Vietnam jungle to strip the jungle so they could fight the Vietnamese soldiers. So the industrial agricultural model actually makes plants sick, it makes us sick. And again, you come back to this, we are what you eat, you know. And there are many, many research papers and other peer-reviewed papers that talk about the link between pesticides and fungicides and insecticides, things like glyphosate, and chronic neurological and autoimmune diseases. I don't think there's a coincidence with rates of cancer going up in the last 50 years and the amount of chemicals that are sprayed in our food. We now have 1 in 2 people getting cancer. So, you know, this is something serious that we need to look at. We need to be aware of this. And the greatest thing is permaculture has all the answers. Anything that we've created as man, any chemical, can actually be reversed through permaculture understanding. And industrial agriculture in the environment. So everything comes from and returns to the earth. Our immune system is directly related to the soil. So if we have lots of chemicals in our food, our immune system is compromised. This is when viruses and disease can get in. The other thing about earth care is it's not just about our physical health, it's about our mental well-being. I know when I go to my allotment and, you know, I do anything related to the soil, I feel better. I feel just at peace with the earth. And there's a practice called forest bathing, Shinrin Yoku, where you go out into the woods and you talk with nature. You can sit down, leave your mobile phone in your car, and just breathe in all those photosides. Photosides are chemicals that trees produce, and they actually interact with our own biology. So, you know, this relationship with nature has been going on for millions of years. And since we've been disconnected from it, we've got sicker. And, you know, this isn't just about what it's doing to our food. This is about how it relates to the rest of the ecosystem. So when we spray this food, it leaches into the rivers, it leaches into the water table, it leaches and acidifies the oceans, it endangers critical species. I mean, the list goes on and on. And also, more kind of significantly to what I'm talking about is it creates drug-addicted plants, plants that don't have an immune system, plants that are weak, plants that are susceptible to pests. The more pesticides that you spray on a plant, the more susceptible it is to pests. If you allow a plant to gain its own immunity, things change. So what is the solution? So the solutions. Earth care is about understanding how we connect to the earth. There are many different ways in which sorry about that, guys. There are many different ways in which we can actually change this relationship and connection. But through permaculture practices, we can purify our soil, we can regenerate the earth, we can create these natural cycles of regeneration, and we can use our resources really wisely. The way we use our resources is, it's in a linear way. It's produce something, use it, throw it away. Whereas nature doesn't do that. Nature's just this constant cycle. And we can witness anything in nature to see that cycle is everywhere. It's in every pattern. So permaculture also gives us practical tools, and this is really important because this isn't just about theory. This is practice. People are proving this. I'm proving it. My mentor's proving the power of permaculture. So it gives us practical tools to remediate soil. So restarting this cycle of regeneration, creation and decay, we can actually bring back this balance into the soil between chemistry and biology. And through this careful stewardship of the land, we can regenerate systems, make them stronger, make them more or less susceptible to attack. We can ensure that our food is so healthy that pests don't even go near it. See, pests only attack plants that are unhealthy. Plants actually send off chemical signals which say whether they're unhealthy or not. And permaculture is holistic. So relying on biodiversity and optimum health to provide protection, against pests and diseases. So there's no need for poison or chemicals or degeneration. All we need to do is understand how plants work, how they process things like photosynthesis, like sunlight, and how they interact with the microorganisms in the soil. And through that observation, we can create a whirlwind of change. Okay, so people care. The health and well-being of humans is in direct relation to the health of the earth. We already mentioned this briefly. Now, on one hand, we've advanced modern medicine, increasing the age of death. But on the other hand, as we also mentioned, chronic diseases seem to be increasing. So we're on one hand increasing the age of death, but the quality of life is actually going down. Now, this isn't, this doesn't attribute to everything, but it's certainly a wide, far-reaching problem. And our community is where we form relationships. So it's with the people that we form relationships with that we can form community, and we can actually make changes. And this is where it gets connected to earth care. Because if enough people in your community care about having a healthy life, we can form community spaces where we grow food together. And if we grow food together, we're more creative, we're more productive, we can share more, we can rely on people in times of hardship. So I'd like to ask you all, you know, what does health mean to you? You can take a few moments to write that down, and it's, you know, for me, it's fundamental that I ask myself a question every day: what is health? What does health mean to me? Um, because it means something different to different people. Okay, the problems. So our whole entire food system is used, well, 90 odd percent of it is produced through chemicals. Now, this using chemicals on food lacks the nutrition that is vital for optimum health. So rather than plants going down into the soil and connecting with the microbes and the mycelium, which is the underground roots of mushrooms, that relationship allows the plant roots to access nutrients like micronutrients and trace nutrients like copper and zinc that they wouldn't be able to get normally. When we use NPK, or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the plants are getting most of what they need. They're getting the three big chemicals, but they're not getting the trace nutrients. And these trace nutrients are the ones that build their immune system. So they might look okay when they're growing out of the ground, but I guarantee you, you test any of those plants and they won't have things like zinc in them, and they won't have things like copper in them, because most of our soil has been degraded of that. The chemicals have washed them out. They've killed the chemicals. And that's really important to remember. And any of you that have got children, I'm sure you want them to eat the healthiest thing they possibly can. And we can all have this when we change our mindset. And our society is sick because the land is sick. Again, these two things go hand in hand. There's, you know, there's always a cause and a relation and an effect in everything we do. And our society's health is directly related to the health of our soil. There are, again, a lot of research projects that have gone into this connection between the soil biome and our gut biome. I'm sure you've all heard of Activia, which is the, you know, the healthy drinks that you get. Well, nature did that first. You know, we don't actually need to buy those drinks. We don't need to buy supplements. If we grow healthy food, we actually literally grow with our food and profit over people. You know, the current global multinational corporations, I can name many, I'll name a few: Monsanto, Bayer. They produce industrial chemicals that are used to spray on our food whilst it's growing, after it's growing. And these companies are putting profit over people. They are only answerable to their shareholders. They are untouchable by governments, mainly because a lot of these companies will, you know, you have it's called the revolving door, where people high up in companies like Bayer will go and sit on the Senate in America, and vice versa. The same similar thing happens in this country. And with the advent of GMOs, genetically modified organisms, are not God's work. They're not nature's work. They're a creation of a capitalist system which, like the pharmaceutical industry, is created to make money. It's not there to create for health. And yeah, so this is really important to remember this, you know, and the degradation of our land, the economy, our health, it's all interrelated. You know, again, it's back to these cycles and these patterns. And the last thing is illusion of scarcity. we're told there's scarcity, but there's not. There's only scarcity under the current model. If we use regenerative techniques, using these permaculture principles and ethics, we can produce enough food for everyone. No one needs to go hungry. Okay. So the solutions, we can regenerate our soil. There are loads of practices, permaculture, Korean natural farming, biodynamic farming. There's loads of them. They've all kind of come up from different parts of the world. Yeah. But really, they're essentially based around the same thing: connection with nature, as least disturbance as possible to the growing medium, and using plants that are native or have been adapted to that environment, to get the most out of them. And when we reconnect the plant's roots with the natural biological and chemical reactions in the soil, like with all the microarthropods, the protozoa, the nematodes, the fungi, the bacteria, the worms, the birds, the spiders, all of that, you build a mini ecosystem in the soil. This is how to regenerate it. But the problem is if nature were to have to do this on her own, it would take quite a while. But if we help her along by being in rhythm with her, we can do it a lot quicker. Quite a lot of calculations have been done, and they reckon, a lot of people, some people think between 5 and 10 years we can actually reverse this. However, we are against the grain of the big corporations. So to start off on a local level is the most important. And that's really the other thing, is probably one of the best solutions out there is localizing our food networks. Imagine if you were to grow your own food or connect with your local farmer, the relationships that you can build through that interaction. There are many farms that allow you to go and pick your own veg. You could get an allotment plot at your local society. You could find a bit of land and start growing on there. You could go to someone in your street, like an old person who might not be able to garden. They might not have the physical capability, and you can help them to create a garden, and you can share the produce. There's loads of different ways. And once you start and get momentum, you become more creative. You allow yourself to be directly connect with nature. And the other great thing about this is, for any of you that have children, once you get children and young people connected to nature, they won't want to let go. They'll see the benefit of it because they've had less conditioning. They've had less time in the technological world. And now's the time to reclaim our food sovereignty. And we can do it as a community. So certainly by empowering young people to reconnect to the land, we can bring out all this intrinsic worth that we have, all the dreams that we had when we were kids. Many of these have been stifled. We can show that to the world. We can create a much better, stronger, self-resilient, regenerative life through this understanding. Okay. So last of the ethics is future care. So there's a saying in Buddhism which is, the next 10 years will portend the following 50. And my question to you is, what do you want to leave the next generation? So as our climate and society changes more than ever, we are at crossroads. Will we continue to walk down the same road of degeneration, or will we have the courage to empower ourselves and change our mindset? And what do you want to leave the next generation? I don't have any children, but I know, I've got nephews and nieces. I know what I want to leave them. I want to leave them a planet where we have the solutions. We might not be able to clean the planet up in my generation, but we can pass on a legacy. You know, most of the legacy that's been passed on to us is one of degeneration. So we can change this around just by changing our mind and our heart. So we can take responsibility, the ability to respond to change. I heard something the other day, which is that most of the pain that we experience, the emotional and psychological pain that we experience, is because we're resistant to change. If we allow ourselves to change, then things are not painful. Okay, so the problem with the future, it is estimated through many studies that there's only maximum 50 years of topsoil left before we can't grow our crops in there. And this is because of the way we farm. We use monocultural systems, which is usually growing one crop. This has been around certainly since the 50s and 60s, but growing one crop, whether it's wheat, barley, oats, all the vegetables, or whatever it may be, that is not a sensible way to grow, because those plants aren't strong when they grow just on their own. They need the interaction of other plant roots to be strong. If we look at a forest, you don't just have all one type of tree, right? Even if it is, like pine or oak, you have several different, genus of oak, and you have other shrubs and stuff growing in between them. And this topsoil issue is partly due to the monocropping system, partly due to the pesticides and the applications that are sprayed on them. And it's also to do with how we till the soil. When you till or you plow the soil, you not only release oxygen, which is energy, you release carbon, which is energy. That causes more problems, as we know. And you destroy the soil biome. And it's the soil biome, the biology, which creates a foundation for the plants to be healthy. Now, we produce as much waste, or we produce so much waste that it cannot be recycled effectively. Many of the plastics that we produce, it actually takes more energy to recycle them than it does to make them. And probably one of the biggest issues for future care is the next generation. They're full of anxiety and fear. They think that the world's going to burn up. We have something called natural variability of the climate. 2,000 years ago, the Romans were growing grapes in York. 12,000 years ago, or 13,000 years ago, we were in an ice age. The climate always changes. My friend has actually written a book called The Climate Always Changes. So again, we can look at nature to see these cycles and patterns. So the solutions, we can think 7 generations ahead. If we think about what's going to happen in the next 100 years, we can take wise, courageous action to ensure that that next 100 years is one of abundance and health rather than degeneration and disease. Purchasing natural quality products. There's so much plastic and so many synthetic materials that we buy that are cheap, don't last, and they just end up going in the landfill. Some of them are recycled, but again, as I mentioned before, this is a problem in itself. But if we buy a product that is made with love, it's quality, it's made of quality materials, it will last a lot longer. We'll take care of it. And we actually build a relationship with that object. It's no longer throwaway. It actually has meaning. It has value. And, you know, just speaking from personal experience, until recently, I did all this as well. And it's only as I started to connect with nature more that I realized that these products, you know, someone has worked hard on making something, you know. Also, along with, you know, the thing that, do we really want to be using products that are made by people that aren't getting paid a fair wage? You know, we can go with this whole fair trade thing, but it's a gimmick which people can sell products for more. So if we went locally, you know, we'd actually create a relationship. And, you know, think of all the things you want to do or your kids want to do. They can do it, or you can do it in a regenerative way. You can be a herbalist. You can make, you know, you can be a carpenter. You can, you know, there's so many different things that you can do to contribute. And what we would best do would be to connect young people to nature, because that way we build up a healthy respect for it. And we don't have to, you know, blame anyone. We can just take responsibility to do the best thing that we know. You know, most of us know when we're not giving it 100%, or we could have made a different choice. And, you know, nobody's perfect, but we can always improve. You know, we're human beings. We're growing all the time and we're evolving. Okay, so the principles of permaculture. These principles are applicable to an ecological site as well as our daily life within our community. They're certainly not separate from each other. So, you know, we can live our lives in syntropy with the natural world. We can integrate ourselves within the natural cycles and patterns, just as we would have done centuries ago. You know, some people still practice this. We still have tribes, you know, isolated throughout the world, but they are in rhythm with nature. They bring forth this innate potential within them to understand, to interact, and to benefit both themselves and the natural world. And really, you know, what is in our hearts? What's most important to us? Most people would say, you know, our family and our friends. Okay. And everyone probably wants their family and friends to be happy. But the way we're going in this world is we have a group of people that aren't making decisions that are the best for everyone. You know, some people call some call these people sociopaths, where they're completely disconnected from the common person. But whatever that may be, that's not really important. The important thing is what can we do? You know, what can we do to actually make a positive impact on the planet? So observe and interact. So if we are to benefit the most from our growing space and our community, we can observe the interactions of everything within that system. Quite often we can miss the bigger picture. We can rush in, we can make judgments, we can make accusations, but essentially none of that is gets us where we want to be. It might make us feel better temporarily, but essentially we're only going to be shooting ourselves in the foot. So when we actually sit back, we observe, we seek to understand, and we listen, we can actually find common ground with people. And those decisions that we do make, we tend to come from a much deeper, wiser place. And we make the decision based on more factors rather than sometimes our limited perspective. We can actually make change for good. So observe and interact, you'll find this principle in many different systems on the planet. You find it in things like psychotherapy or coaching or hypnotherapy. Listening and sitting back and understanding is essential to growth. So the next principle is capture and store energy. So this is one of my favorites. Sure, most of you know this: energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It merely changes form, or it just moves somewhere else. In today's modern world, the way we use energy is really inefficient, it's ineffective, and there are many ways to produce energy. We have oil and gas, and they have allowed the industrial era to advance how we've advanced. They brought us many benefits such as technology and permaculture. Sorry, technology and science, and even permaculture. And there are newer technologies such as solar and wind. Now, this might be a bit of a shock, but fossil fuels are not actually fossil fuels. They're called abiotic. And it means that they're not actually finite. Fossil fuels can replenish themselves, and there are examples of this around the world. So it's not so much what the energy is, it's how it's used. So I'll give you an example. Solar panels. To make solar panels, we need rare earth materials. We need cobalt, we need lithium, and cadmium and other things. Now, these rare earth materials come from mines, usually in South America, Asia, Africa. And the people that mine these things are not treated very well. They're exposed to toxic chemicals. They have a really hard life. And plus, these mines leach toxic chemicals into the natural ecosystem. Then when we use solar panels, they only have a lifetime of 20 years. And then what happens? We can't recycle them. The other thing is how are these materials produced? The electric car, solar panels, wind turbines, they're all produced using oil and gas. So then they're not actually renewable. I'm not dissuading anyone from going out and buying solar panels, because if you put them on their roof and you're going to get 20 years out of them, great. But this is just to say that we need to be aware. Now, the biggest producer, or the most effective way, or the most effective mechanism that produces energy are actually plants. They're the best solar panels on the planet. The amount of energy they put into the soil when they're in optimum working order is actually quite amazing. And on that note, many people say we have a carbon problem. The best solution to the carbon problem is plant plants. 1 hectare of growing material can produce a minimum of 8.4 tons of carbon. It can capture 8.4 tons of carbon per year. This would sort out all the issues, the cycling issues, all this kind of stuff. And let's just put it simply, all these energy systems, we use them all the time. We use them to cook food, we use them to produce heat. We use them to quench our thirst. We use them to entertain ourselves. So how we use these, how we store the energy, you know, we'll go into this in more detail on future webinars, but I just wanted to drop that in there. Obtain a yield. One of the most important, especially when you're first starting off in permaculture, obtaining a yield is proof of the pudding. Now, in permaculture, obtaining a yield is different than it is in the industrial monoculture system. Excuse me one moment. There we go, that's better. Okay. Obtaining a yield is really important because if we put all the effort into growing food, we want to eat something. Now, through permaculture ethics and principles, obtaining a yield is slightly different. So rather than using monocultural systems where we just grow one crop, permaculture rarely does this. We will use things like companion planting or guilds. This is where you interplant different species that actually get on well together. They can feed each other, they can protect each other. You know, there's certain flowers that you can plant, or things like garlic that you can plant around more delicate crops that disguise the smell of those delicate crops, so pests are less likely to find them. There's guilds like the Three Sisters. The Three Sisters is squash, corn, and beans, and they all have a part to play in this mini ecosystem. The beans fix nitrogen for the heavy squash feeders, who love nitrogen. This is why they grow so big. And the corn provides a support for the beans to grow up. All the while, the leaves of the squash plants protect the soil and prevent erosion from too much heat or too much rain. The Native Americans were using this Three Sisters guild thousands and thousands of years ago. There are other guilds as well. There's one called the Five Cousins, and you can even make up your own. It's just about knowing what the plants need. And these guilds can even include animals. You know, there are many far-reaching potential ways that we can go through this. And a lot of this is about creativity. But once you know the principles and the ethics, things actually change dramatically for you. So, next up, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. So Mother Earth is a perfect example of self-regulation and feedback. Of course, there is interactions of the sun, the moon, the other planets, which all affect what's happening on the Earth. But really, she regulates her own temperature, her moisture, uses decay to bring back new life, again, this cycle, and gives humans everything we need to be healthy and happy. You know, nature can take away, it can give, but there's always this cycle. And as soon as we start seeing life in these cycles, things actually become a little bit easier to understand. When we see things on their linear way, we can struggle to understand certain concepts and why the world is the way it is. So, next slide. Use and value renewable sources and services. For centuries, we've depleted Mother Earth of her resources, polluting our soils, our rivers, our oceans. What services and sources are truly renewable? Well, there are some, but we have to be aware. Now, we can produce, or we can use and value renewable sources and services on a small scale a lot easier than we can on a big scale. Now, this relates to capturing and storing energy, but for instance, if we capture our own rainwater, we can use that rainwater to grow our food. There's technology called grey water systems where you can use your shower water and your sink water, run it through a filter and water your plants. You can capture water on your land. There's loads and loads of different ways. You can have a wood stove. A lot of people don't think that's as good as central heating, but with energy prices going up, there's so many different ways that we can actually stack functions. Stacking functions is like a way that we use permaculture principles to create many functions out of one element. So an example of this would be if you had a chicken or chickens, you can use them for their eggs, you can use them to fertilize the land, you can use them to eat weeds that you don't want. And for any people that are meat eaters, you can slaughter the chicken and eat it. And chickens obviously produce other chickens. So once you create these cycles, it's easier to value these renewable sources because everything in nature is essentially renewable. Services are slightly different. And as I said, as long as we're aware of the ecological footprint we leave when we buy something like solar panels, we can get the most from them. And I'm sure maybe in the future they will find a way to recycle some of these materials. So produce no waste. This is one of my favorites. That picture in the background is actually the compost that me and two of my friends started making last year or the year before. I can't really remember. But we were lucky enough to know someone that had some land and we were able to use his land to make the compost. I still make compost in small batches. And, this is something that I can do a webinar on, but making compost is like a lot of fun. It's a bit of work. But when you do it right, your plants will love it, your seeds will love it. And there's nothing quite like doing it. So I believe a wasteful society is born from a distortion of what abundance is and a misunderstanding of the value of products that we buy or material objects. We waste, well, this is my observation, but I certainly have in the past wasted and undervalued things. And, and this is because I didn't understand its intrinsic worth. It's not until I started growing food, and certainly when I started on my permaculture journey, that I started to realize, where does this object come from? Who made it? Where will it go, when I'm finished with it? So in order to produce no waste, we need to be mindful about what we consume. I have a little saying in regards to food: if you can't compost it, don't eat it. Because inevitably we do produce some kind of waste if we don't eat everything. We have skins of stuff and peels. But if we compost it, we're not wasting it, because that energy, that energy doesn't change. That energy, so the energy doesn't disappear, the energy just changes. And rather than giving it to your council to compost, and they don't do it very well, because, that's another story. But we can actually do it ourselves. We can compost in our garden. If you haven't got a garden, you've just got a balcony, you can compost using compost worms. You can use bokashi buckets, which compost dairy and meat and things like this. All these things are tried and tested, and they're really, really useful. And, nature will never waste anything. And the greatest thing is we're even discovering the world of permaculture is even discovering ways of recycling or creating organic waste from artificial waste. So polystyrene can actually be digested by mealworms, which turn it into organic material. Mushrooms, like oyster mushrooms, can remediate soil that's been contaminated with glyphosate. Mycelium's been trained to eat cigarette butts, it's been trained to eat oil. You know, the list goes on, and it's quite astounding. You know, sometimes I just think, wow, nature's just wow. So next up, design from patterns to details. So nature functions through patterns, from a spider's web to a river delta. A river delta, or leaves, or sorry, the veins of a leaf, or the veins in our arm, or tree branches. This is called a dendritic pattern. And you'll find this everywhere. You can also find other patterns like the Fibonacci spiral. You see this in many vegetables, in sunflowers, in other flowers. And there's also a thing called fractal patterns. All of these things are produced by nature in all sorts of different forms, from the microcosm to the macrocosm. But there is a universal design to everything. And when we understand these patterns and these cycles, we can fill in the contextual details in between so we can benefit from it. We can give back to the land, we can give to ourselves, we can give to our community. Nothing has to be excluded. The only thing is, again, it's the mindset. When we change this mindset, we actually change the way we live, and we change our health. We change everything. So next up, integrate, not segregate. There's enough division on the planet, you know? Everything that's happened in the last 2.5 years has caused so much division that you wonder why. You know, why can we not solve the problems on the planet? Why do people still starve? Why is there war? And some of this is through disconnection, but also it's about, you know, seeing someone as different from you. You know, and I'm not talking about like color of skin or anything like that. I'm talking about your ideals, your opinions, your choices. We're all human beings. We've all grown up in different ways. We've all had different conditioning. We've all been to different schools, and, you know, we like different colors and all that kind of stuff. But really, we're all human. We want the same thing. We want to be happy. We want to feel fulfilled. You know, we want our family and our loved ones to be happy as well. And rather than dividing, you know, go back decades, you know, maybe to the 50s, and even now, and people think it's about competition, survival of the fittest, you know, but, and, you know, you can see this in some cases, okay, you know, a herd of wildebeest being chased by a pack of lions, and the lions are going to go for the weakest wildebeest, obviously. But in certain ecosystems, or in most ecosystems, we have competition, but there's also cooperation within there as well. So again, going back to the monoculture system, if we grow one crop, it's more susceptible to insect and disease attack. If we grow 2 or 3 crops, it's less likely. Even if we grow one crop and they're different varieties, that's going to strengthen the system as a whole. You know, one of the reasons for the potato famine in Ireland, apart from the dismal weather, was that they only grew one crop of potatoes, and that one crop got susceptible to blight, and that killed millions. You know, if they'd have grown a few varieties, they would have mitigated against that. So seeing our unique qualities as an expression of ourselves rather than the difference that needs to be argued upon is a great way to look at things. We all have something to contribute. We all look different. We all feel different. But there are these intrinsic qualities within every human being that is similar. And if we focus on that, you know, food is a great way. Don't have to argue about food. Everyone likes good quality food. And if we can give food to someone, they'll really appreciate it. Okay. So use small and slow solutions. This photo on here was when I went out foraging for mushrooms. The reason I chose mushrooms was simply because mushrooms are quite slow at growing. They only fruit rarely, you know, sometimes once a year, sometimes less, depending on the conditions. But mushrooms are the unsung heroes of the soil. They connect all plants. Over 95% of plants rely on this relationship with the mycelium, which is the underground mushroom network. They decay wood and all sorts of stuff, and they do it slowly, you know, over ecological time. Like a tree growing, it grows slowly. It's not like us. And as humans, we actually have the power to influence things very quickly and very rapidly. Nature rarely does this. There are events where things change quickly, but nature usually mitigates against this. So the advantage of using small and slow solutions is that if we're going to change something, it's better to change a small part of it than a big part of it, because we want to see the effect from that cause rather than just being a bull in a china shop. I've been like that before, and just changing everything at once, because then if it has a negative effect, it's going to be far harder to pull that back. So yeah, it's just important to remember that, so we can mitigate against too much of a, you know, awkwardness. Okay, use and value diversity. Again, this is like really important. Many make the strong. It is within our nature to communicate and support each other, you know. Diversity is key to any system, whether it's culturally, within the community. We need diversity. We need young people, old people. We need, you know, women, men. We need people with all sorts of different opinions and different skills and resources and colours and faiths, etc. All of these things are an expression of individuality, but essentially we're all sentient beings that want to be happy and all of that stuff. So by using or valuing diversity, we're able to contribute and share more and gain more. And this is the same with an ecosystem. An ecosystem has to be diverse if it's going to be strong. It has to have certain elements that will, or certain plants that will protect the other more delicate plants against climatic changes or pests. You know, it needs all the smells and the aromas and the colors. And when we put these things into place, the system just gets stronger and stronger year on year. So an example of this is a food forest. This will keep improving its yield over time. It will get stronger as more plants start to mature and start to take on their individual form. And use edges and value the marginal. So this one might be a little bit ambiguous. But if you imagine the edges of two ecosystems meeting, so for instance, a beach is where the water and the land meets. And most often that edge is where the most life occurs. It's where the most abundance is. It's where the most diversity is. It's where you might have two specialists, one in the water and one on the land, will meet. They might be able to help each other. There might be competition. But essentially, even with a lot of, mammals that are seagoing mammals, this is where a lot of the action and a lot of the breeding takes place. This is where they raise their young. So, you can see it on the forest edge as well, where the forest goes into a meadow. You have light that hits the forest in a different way than it would in a forest. So you get edge species of flowers and birds and insects, and all these things integrate and connect with each other. And you can even see this in society. I'm sure certain people in your life that might have several groups of friends because they're like an edge person. They're able to communicate with people from all walks of life, So this is something that makes more sense as you start to understand the principles. One practical application for this would be if you're growing veg, you can have an edge species like flowers. Those flowers will not only protect your vegetables from attack from certain insects, but it will bring in the pollinating bees and butterflies that you want. They'll get attracted by the flowers, and they can also pollinate your vegetables as well. So, last principle, creatively use and respond to change. As I mentioned earlier, the resistance to change is what brings us pain. If you look at nature, nature just adapts, usually quickly, to changes. Whether that might be a forest fire or a flood, they're able to adapt because they have it within their DNA to be able to do it. Now, humans do as well, although there's many modern things that have pushed us away from this natural connection. Essentially, we all have it within us. So the ability to respond rather than react is vital for effective and positive growth. Our creativity shines most when we come from a place of empowerment. And to be creative is the ultimate empowerment. And it's actually in times of difficulty that we can be the most creative. We can adapt the most. We can become stronger. We can become more of ourselves. We don't have to change who we are, but certainly our perspective on things, how we view things. If we change how we view them, it's actually a lot easier for us. We don't have to suffer over things that we can't change. We just have to be empowered about the things that we can change. So that's the end of the ethics and the principles. I hope all of you obviously got something from this, and my next webinar will be on the 13th of March. It will be on another Monday. I am open to change the date and the day, not for March, but certainly for future webinars. And any of you that have any questions over things that I've talked about, please feel free to email me. Also, if you know of anyone that might perhaps be interested in these webinars in the future, please ask them to email me at sowseedgrowfeed@protonmail.com, and I'll be happy to add them to the next Zoom call. So thank you very much for joining. I hope you're all starting to think about planting seeds if you're not already. Sow as many seeds as you possibly can. Be creative. Envision what you really want from your life. What do you want to grow? What do you want to eat? Who in your community can you do it with? All of those things. Get together and have fun, and just think about what it would be like to have a regenerative life that is in connection with nature. Thank you very much. This is John from Sow and Grow Regenerative. Take care, all of you, and see you next time.